Zoom did not foil me this week.
Welcome back, friendo.
It's been a long time since I've chatted with Vicky.
I know, I've missed you.
It's been like hundreds of seconds. Apologies, I'm coming off another call. Give me one moment. Posted a link to our agenda in the Zoom chat. Please mark your attendance, and if you have any items you would like to discuss today. Dr. Wheeler will not be joining us, but we still can have an exciting conversation without him. So we'll get started in just about 2 minutes. Go grab a coffee or whatnot, which is what I'm going to go do. I'll be right back. All right, everybody, it is 2 after the hour. We will get started. Welcome to the July 19th edition of the Best Working Group. As is tradition, do we have any new friends to the group that wanted to introduce themselves and say hello? Stephen.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, wherever y'all are in the world. I'm Steve Morowski. I'm on the advocacy team at Microsoft, focused on cloud native and open source, and looking forward. And since I spend a good bit of time in the open source space, I thought this might be a great place to get plugged in and see where I can help and what I can learn.
Excellent. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
We have any other new friends that wanted to say hello? All right. Can I get a volunteer to help us take notes today?
I will help, but I will need an assist. So if others would like to pile in, that would be lovely.
Awesome. Yeah, the document is open for everyone to help edit and comment on, so please help out. Do we have, I'd like everyone to note if we have any opens, please type those underneath our project updates. We'll talk about those. We'll start off. Do we have any of our member projects that wanted to give an update on any milestones or exciting things they're working on?
Well, maybe SKF then. So we actually started to roll out the SSO implementation. We already did a lot of work to facilitate it. So now we have GitHub and Google. It seems to work. We only need to refactor a bit of the front end because yeah, there's some redirecting tango going on there, a lot of redirects, and it seems like the front end Angular app still needs to be modified a bit. But overall, the key cloud, the Kraken Day, the whole setup seems to be working now, running in a Kubernetes stack, so that's good. I do have a question to the people here in the group, like what other type of login mechanisms should we or do we want? I mean, now I just picked GitHub and Google because they were the most obvious, but which one would be also interesting to add there as a possible method.
You also might want to send a note out to our mailing list, Glenn, that might capture some folks that aren't here. We have a lot of regulars that aren't able to attend today. But
Yes,
if anyone has any suggestions, type it into the notes, raise your hand, yell out at Glenn, or look out for an email. Not yell at Glenn, but get Glenn's attention.
by the way, what is our email list?
Our list for this group
Yeah,
is, what is the name of it? I have that. 1 second. Haven't used it in a while. It's going to be OpenSSF WG best practices at OpenSSF. I'm sorry. I'll type it in right here. Give me a second. I'll put it right into the notes. There you go. So OpenSSF working group best practices at lists.openssf.org is our mailing list. There's also a Slack channel if anyone wants to join on that.
yeah, that one I had. So perfect.
Any questions for Glenn?
I guess the only question I have as a new person, what project are we which project are we talking about?
Yeah, so the project, the security knowledge framework. So basically that is the education and learning platform where we well, help developers getting the right security requirements. There are code examples, knowledge base items, checklists like the ASCS, MASCS. And there's also this capability that we released like 3 months ago, also thanks to this working group. That has like a training module, so people can do a self-learning for secure coding based on David Wheeler's content and material, and also web API hacking based on the OWASP testing guide and infra. And basically, you can do all the materials, and then you have like this lab you can spin up, and you can also do the practical stuff.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I posted a link into the chat. We have a couple member projects of which Glenn helps lead SKF, and think of that as the actual hands-on keyboard of learning of the good practices. We also have a couple classes that Dr. Wheeler wrote. We have the CRE folks, which are standards in a code format. So we have a couple of member projects that you can take a look at, and we have links to all of them off of our page. And there's an amazing diagram some genius put together that kind of shows how they relate a little bit. It's a very stable genius. Any other member projects here today, inventories or scorecard that wanted to give an update?
Hi everyone, I'm Spiros. I'm the inventory guy. I don't really have any updates. In fact, I was on holiday and I'll be on holiday for the next couple of weeks. So updates is there are no updates.
I will say I stepped into the scorecards all-star meeting last week, and they are making kind of an architectural change. You might want to check out their project to see where they are going to be opening up an API that, for access to help manage. They've had the scorecards go out and do a scan of about 1 million open source projects and then report on kind of a risk posture statement of kind of the security qualities of those projects. And they are enabling an API to help with the to help throttle some of the traffic. So that's kind of exciting news from them. All right. Does anyone have any opens to talk about? Otherwise, we will go to our one pager and see if we can get this finished up today.
Is that work that is still in a PR in scorecards, or is that already merged?
I believe
Where
it
do you
is in a
suggest
PR.
to? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And much like this call, all the OpenSSF meetings are recorded, and they actually did a little demo. They talked through it. I think did a little demo. So you may want to check out the YouTube video. It was about midway through the call when they were talking about that. And somebody much smarter than me explained it. An actual developer. All right. Let us, hopefully, for the final time for this round, let us look at the one-page guide for developing more secure software. This has been a project we've had. The intention is to create a one-page resource that lists off some of the best, most impactful practices you can take as a developer and as a project, and then provide links off to those resources on how to do the thing or get additional context. This will be posted as an artifact as part of our Git repo and part of the OpenSSF body of knowledge. And we think we are very close to finalizing it. It looks like David went through and remediated any of the final comments. So does anyone have any parting thoughts before we start to push the button to get this document published? And this is intended to be a cheat sheet, not intended to replace actual training. So it's supposed to provide that guidestone where somebody finds this and can go learn more about, for example, how to implement ASVS or how to create your own security advisory, for example. Push the button. Thanks, Dave. Marta. Hello again.
Yeah, here again. I have one suggestion to actually test run it against some developers.
Ooh, that's an excellent idea. Do you have any developer friends we could do that with?
I can, but mostly in the embedded space, so it will be biased.
Fair. Vicky, question or suggestion?
Yeah, so we have one or two open source or developers here at Wipro, and kind of an open question to Eric here. Would it make sense to have your team walk through this? Because I think they'd be really well placed to provide feedback. Eric's hand is up, so I shall defer to the man.
Yeah, so one of the things we haven't actually publicized, but I'm making my team go through everything we write to follow the best practices toward anything we release, getting the best practices badge. And we have several things in the pipeline to make this happen over time. Obviously, it's a fairly broad scope of items, so we're going through them all. Yeah, we can certainly do some of this. I already have a number of people doing number one, so we can take a look at it. Some of this will be harder to test, like earning the best practice badge, as I just mentioned. But we can certainly test out some of these and validate a number of them. Like 14, for example, we're doing some work on that, and everything we're doing is based off of the SALSA framework. For 15, so we can take a look at it and certainly get some feedback.
Excellent, thank you. That's awesome news. I appreciate that. And is it 2 eyes in WePro or 1 eye?
1 eye.
1 eye. All right.
Not like the Nintendo Wii, just the WePro.
Thank you, Randall.
I just wanted to point out when I was, because we've already started doing the best practices at Astro, and we've already started upstreaming that to Solid because we have a very good relationship with Solid and Beat. And I just want to point out that some of the stuff doesn't necessarily apply to JS, and apparently that gives people the wrong impression. Like some of it just doesn't apply to them. So I think that there are certain things in the best practices badge that get difficult with certain projects. And I just wanted to bring that up because it turned into a whole discussion of like, does best practices even apply to JS, which was kind of a whole thing. As you know, the JS community is extremely opinionated. So yeah, it turned into one of those things. So I just wanted to point that out, that did happen.
So
Especially with the static analysis part and the dynamic analysis, because they don't really have a whole lot of tooling there. So that was a big disconnect with them.
do you have any other notes that we could share back to David to improve the badges program to account for maybe just in a warning or documentation, but try to
absolutely.
help?
I could put something together and if you can share with me your email or David's email or where you want me to send it, I could put that in an email together this morning and send it over.
Right. One moment, I'll get Dr. Wheeler's email. Any additional thoughts on running through the list and proving it out? Vicky?
Quick one, rather than sending that email just directly to David, could we send it to the mailing list?
Of course he could, which we
That would be
have
awesome.
noted.
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
notes.
Internal.
Excellent.
I'm asking out of curiosity, but does lack of tooling for JS, for instance, for static analysis, does that mean that it is not required, or is there like a gap which should be bridged?
For the record, there is static analysis tooling. It's just is not very big, and a lot of efforts that have tried have kind of just stopped and failed. It's just, to be honest with you, I don't think the JS community really values that type of tooling as much as some of the other communities, but there are projects out there that do provide static analysis. It's just like one hasn't been touched since like 2018, and like another one hasn't been touched since I think 2020. So, and that's the thing, is that it's more of a lack of updates. And the other thing about it is just from like the reaction with Vite and just the reaction of a lot of developers. Like the thing about JS is you have a lot of young developers that kind of feel like they could do no wrong. There's nothing wrong with having 800 package dependencies and not being able to audit them, and one package is from like hasn't been touched since the early 2000s. It's just a lot. I think a lot of it is the attitude, because they're not open to, like, they don't see security honestly as a, if you want to call it like a big deal. They kind of see it as they're still on the whole JS Kool-Aid train of, hey, look what I can do on JS. So as I said, I don't think they really value that type of tooling.
Stephen.
Hi, yeah. So, I'm just getting a first glance at the checklist here, at the guide, and I'm happy to kind of socialize that around, the developer advocacy group and some of the other open source teams here at Microsoft. But my first impression was like, wow, that's dense. There's a lot there, and my just from previous experience with guides and stuff like that, it feels like that there would be little eyes glazing over, and all right, that's too much to tackle. Feel I think that it looks like there's a bunch of excellent resources and direction. I'm just not. I'm happy to get some more feedback on it. My first impression was like, wow, that's dense, but I didn't put any of the work into it, so it's easy for me to come in and comment, afterward.
Keep in mind, this is a first step.
Yeah.
Once we have the list, then we can figure out a plan of how we're going to evangelize the list, train the list.
Yeah.
There could be potentially blogs or webinars. We have a whole other effort focused around developer education, the education SIG, which is the best SIG. That meets tomorrow, where we're talking about actual implementing training, and that might be potentially, this artifact could be passed over to that group and we
Yeah.
create some training or a webinar or a podcast to talk through it so we can provide additional context.
Cool. So I apologize for context-free commentary.
No, don't worry. Eric.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, one of the notes on this I would make is some of the links actually go to other documents that are still in draft format. So we want to make
Okay.
So we want to make sure that we, as we get to that point, that all of these are cleaned up and ready to go themselves, or at least not noted as draft. And some of the projects that they go to, go to Git, and in GitHub, you end up, are the pages clear enough for somebody to use as a cheat sheet quick guide? Would be one of the questions. So maybe some deeper evaluation on if you're doing this. If I click on this and I go to the page, is what's provided by the GitHub project page, really something that's easily consumed as a cheat sheet kind of, or should it be in and of itself a document that kind of clearly shows example of how you use what's in the GitHub project? So those are some of the considerations to make down the path. What is the use case of actually implementing this as part of the quick guide versus here's just the documentation on how this works. And then lastly, should this be named what it is? Is it really a one pager, or should it really just be called the cheat sheet for developing? Because it's really, that's all this is it gives you a bunch of links, and very, very brief description of what it is. So if I need specifically to find out information on what I should be doing, it has the bullet points, but all of the relevant information on each bullet point is somewhere else, right? So it's, to your point earlier, it really is more of a cheat sheet. But I definitely think before this is released, we need to look at all of these sublinks. And of course, I volunteered some people on my team will also document some of these things as we find them. But those are initial thoughts, is we can't release this as a quick guide or something to get you up and running if what's underneath it is not really clear.
Two excellent pieces of feedback. Thank you, Eric. I captured those as comments in the doc. We need to go through and verify the links and their status to make sure it lands on something that's actionable. And then the title. I appreciate that. That's good feedback. Randall.
Some of this is already automated by GitHub's CodeQL, which is actually what we ended up agreeing with, like between all of us, to share a CodeQL database between Solid, Astro, and Vite. So just pointing that out.
Yeah, our dear friend Xavier from GitHub, who helps shepherd the CodeQL efforts, has some automobile trouble today, so he was not able to join us. But yeah, we've talked about CodeQL quite a lot, and that is something we probably, when we do a blog or whatever, we could state as context that these tasks are automatable if you leverage GitHub as your source code repository.
If you want me to take notes of what we're doing between the three projects and send those to the mailing list too for a blog post, I could definitely do that, because that's an ongoing thing we're doing right now.
That would be awesome. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem.
Some great feedback. Any additional thoughts on this one-page list? Cheat sheet. I think we can get David to change the name. All right. Well, thank you, everybody that has helped today and in the past. We're one step closer to actually pushing this out. I look forward to hearing feedback from those people that are going to take the list and move into action. So before we move on to the next item, which is going to be the companion piece to this one-page document, which is a quick guide for evaluating open source software. We had a proposal in one of our calls, and I wanted to run it by the group. Do we see value in, once we finish up this one-pager and then the evaluating one-pager, would a next good project be writing some type of technical paper around leveraging multi-factor authentication for projects? I see Vicky liked the idea. Does anyone have any other ideas or thoughts about a next project being a multi-factor guide? Some of us might have these awesome Titan tokens. Okay. If you want to, drop some notes in our meeting agenda if you feel you like the idea or you hate the idea or you're tepid on the idea. We will probably definitely looks like probably take that on, since we also own the Great Multi-Factor Distribution Project as one of our sub projects. All right, let us look at the rougher quick guide for evaluating open source software. This was intended to be a companion piece. So we have the cheat sheet for developers. This is how you can help write and maintain good code. This artifact would be focused on developers pulling in dependencies possibly, or consumers of open source software. This is how someone could understand, is this piece of software good? Does it meet my risk tolerances, or is it fit for use for my project? So I'll give you a few minutes to look through the much shorter list. There's only 7 things we're recommending so far, but cruise through that for a moment, and we'll start talking about each of the items in a second. I don't have any Jeopardy music to play. I definitely will do that. Here is the link. I'll also put it into the agenda. Oh man, our style on this document got jacked. All my bullet points are messed up.
I just fixed that like 2-3 weeks ago too.
I don't know, maybe. Well, in a couple months, we'll have a brand new document in January. So if we can wait till January, suffer through. Otherwise, we might want to see about a longer term fix. That's what you get when you use free documents. All right, so I am a consumer of open source, whether it's Stephen.
So there's a bullet point, the first bullet point, or first number 2, A, where we have determined whether the default configuration interface API and simple examples are secure, and if not, avoid it. Do we define what makes an interface API or default configuration actually secure?
Not yet.
Or provide guidance in that direction?
And this will be in the style of the first cheat sheet, where we would provide links to if someone had a great resource guide that helped people evaluate that. So if you have some ideas or contributions, that'd be wonderful.
Not off the top of my head, but I'm happy.
No worries.
That's a point to look. That's a open research point. Okay.
So so just fun fact, it took us like 2.5 months to get the 1-pager actually down to a 1-pager on the other document. And this is only like the 2nd or 3rd time we've talked about this one. So this will probably be a much more involved process of collecting feedback and links to help refine this down to a more usable document. So if you have suggestions on like evaluating, is this secure, or evaluating APIs, that would be super useful to put in as comments.
Sounds good.
As I was starting off, so I'm a consumer of open source, and I have this list, and the first point, which is, should this software be added at all? Unfortunately, we don't have any suggestions around that. So first open question to the group, does anyone have any previous art that you are aware of on how to evaluate dependencies or libraries? Is anyone aware of any materials around that? Or potentially comparing your requirements to linking up software to requirements. I'll start off with Fabian.
Yeah, thanks. So I know from the Go community, they have this proverbs section where they say a little copying is better than a little dependency or something along those lines. And I like this. You can remember it quite nicely. Not sure if they have guidelines along like how would you decide how much to copy, but that might be a good resource.
Okay, if you could put that either in the meeting docs or as a comment, that'll be useful. We can kind of take a look at that and think through it. That'll be awesome.
Yep, will do.
Thank you. It looks like Stephen's hand was up next.
Yeah, I think that kind of comes down to the heart of you know, reuse versus re-implement, right? Like build versus buy type discussions. And I don't know if you can answer that question first without answering a number of the questions underneath it, right? Yeah, there's the because you have the balance of, all right, if I re-implement this code, now I'm responsible for its security and maintenance and all of these other things. And if those other bits are already being checked off by the rest of that list, then maybe yes, it should be added, but it's sort of circular.
Yeah, it's the chicken and egg.
Yeah.
Vicky.
First of all, I am completely horrified by Golang's a little copying is better than a little dependency, unless that copying is including over the copyright and licensing statements, because otherwise you're just stealing, literally stealing someone else's copyright. I don't care what license it's under if you don't give them credit. So someone's got to have a little sit down, heart to heart with Golang. And I know plenty of intellectual property lawyers who are very empathetic who can help with that. So please let us not ever recommend that. Please, for love of dog. That aside, I have found that when this does exist, it's almost always everyone's rolling their own internally. And it's usually not well communicated internally. And it's certainly difficult to enforce internally. And so you end up with developers just grabbing whatever and throwing them in there, which ends up again with a lot of compliance issues, not only for security, but also for licensing. So I would love it if we could find a way to have a single source of truth for these recommendations. And so I'm very grateful for the fact that this group is taking this on, because I think it'll be an excellent resource for everyone to be able to iterate on and point to.
And if anyone is aware of any kind of inclusion criteria or any kind of guidance around, mapping to principles or requirements, that any kind of documentation would be useful to start with so that we can decide what we would like to include and recommend. So any additional thoughts on number one before we move on to number two, which is equally amorphous and vague? David. All right. As I mentioned to Stephen, if anyone has any recommendations on good resources to help evaluate the security of a project or an API. For example, our friends, the Scorecards project and All-Star may be a nice criteria for something like this. We would want to provide links to that. They have a set of security and risk criteria that they advertise, they evaluate, and then advertise periodically. So that could be one criteria definitely to help evaluate the security profile. I don't know that it gets into interfaces or APIs, but it's a start. Any other ideas or suggestions?
I'm sorry, are you referring to the first two or the second two? Because there are two bullets with the number 2 on the document.
There are? Oh dear. Oh, there are.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Let me continue previous numbering. There we go. How's that? Is that better? I'm talking about the first two. 2 prime.
Because it looks like the second 2, which is now 3, was expanding on what it means to use securely, or maybe it was just my understanding.
I agree. I think that 3 kind of builds on 2. I think, and potentially maybe we can knock off number 2 as it exists. As potentially 3 replaces it.
Because it's a bit too amorphic, right? Use securely. What does it mean?
It's unlike David rarely uses such open language. Any additional thoughts? Do we think that 3 replaces 2? Or provides that additional material we need to make 2 actionable? Vicky, I see a lot of thumbs up. Vicky?
I would say that 2 is distinct from 3. There's a difference between using it and developing the thing itself. And that seems to be what's going on here. Number 2 is it easy for me as a consumer to use this in a secure manner, right? Does it give me the guardrails such that that makes it difficult to do anything insecure? Whereas number 3 is, I as a maintainer, is there evidence that I am doing all the things, having the best practices, I know where they can get badges for that, to develop this in a secure manner. So as the consumer is using it, they know that they're not going to get into a log4j situation, right? And so these are distinct. I don't think they should be rolled into each other. I think if anything, yeah, definitely switching the order, I think.
Okay, that's fair.
And then expand on 2 once after it becomes 3. Now we're going to just confuse everything with our numbering if we swap them. But that's okay. We're smart people.
Other thoughts? Well, I take my terrible notes. All right, let's focus in. Stephen.
I was just going to say that I appreciate Vicky's restatement of that and then the reordering, because it's hard to say, is this usable securely, and is there a secure way to use this without first identifying that the library itself is built with security in mind and and is following secure practices and how it handles data and connections and all that. So I appreciate that.
Glenn.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, maybe it's good to also, I mean, it's still in a draft. I don't know when we actually want to publish it.
Well, this has a lot of work to go.
Yeah, okay, because if we are at a point that we say, okay, this looks reasonable, yeah, then I would say maybe it's also a good idea for my own open source project to go over the list, yeah, and try to do it, because like the practice, the badge and stuff, I did it. It's hanging on 97%. I have no idea how I can get to 100%. Also, that took quite some time. So, yeah.
I'll put that into our team meeting notes. That's a great idea. My observation is, based off of how long it took us to hammer on the other document, We're a solid 2 months away from getting this near to completion. But
Okay.
I'll add that feedback that we need to make sure we have somebody test it out as we're doing with the other document.
Exactly, because yeah, if it's not quick, then we should just call it guide for evaluating. So that was more my point. So, but I would love to test it as well and apply it and see which really, you know, adds value and makes sense, and which things would more like a remark, like, yeah, they're nice, but you know, focus on these first because that's where you get the big bang.
And Dave Russo has a comment in the chat as we should endeavor to shorten that timeline. I welcome everybody's participation outside of this every 2 weeks hour to contribute to the document. The more feedback we get outside of this meeting and collaboration we get outside of this meeting, the quicker we'll be able to publish the second document. We can move as fast as we have contributors. Otherwise, it'll be very slow me reading the document every couple of weeks. Dave, you want to raise your hand?
I do. Hopefully you can see me and hear me and my camera's working today. That's awesome. Yeah, and you're right, Crow. We can't just spend these meetings going through these documents. We do need to have input outside of meetings, but perhaps setting up a roadmap or a timeline as to when these reviews or periodic reviews will take place. Mm-hmm. So everyone who wants to have a comment can get it, make sure they get it in by a certain time. Otherwise, they're certainly welcome to comment on the next version of whatever artifact we're working on. That might help move things along a little bit more quickly. I think, you know, I think the one pager is in good shape. I understand why it took as long as it did, and I think this one's going along the same road. But I think we need a little bit more rigor in our scheduling to try and get some of these things through the process, at least get the initial versions of them available and reviewed and available a little more quickly.
I agree. Could I enlist your help in helping us create a little process around this and helping?
Well, I'm shocked that you asked that question, Crow. Yes, I would be happy to help doing that.
Yay! Great. Yeah. So I agree. It's would be much more fruitful use of our time to have a little more process. So if Dave, you can help us with that, that would be amazing. Any additional thoughts around adding a little bit of rigor and predictability into our review of these? All right. Since we're here, looking at the current number 3, is there evidence that this is there evidence that its developer will work to make it secure? So do we have any feedback on the existing sub-bullets of number 3, just off the top of our heads? I know many of you have, this is the first time you've seen this document, but Dave's going to help us fix that. Marta.
Yeah, my first feedback looking at that is that the list is very long and there are a lot of links, and people would just say, oh my. And I'm not going to do that, basically.
Agreed. So what would your suggestion be, to tighten the list up or potentially break it up into other points?
I would say probably to list actionable items people can do without using any links to additional materials. Okay. That, I think, is what people prefer to have.
Okay. Fair enough. Any additional thoughts? It is a very long set of things.
Maybe some more subsets of others. For instance, the CI bullet seems to be a part both of OSSF and the CII badge, right? So
That's something we definitely get direction we could take this. And I guess we need to decide as a group, looking at this a little more closely. Like, for example, number 4, are there instructions on how to report vulnerabilities? The list appears to be just a series of questions. And is that something useful for a consumer just to have a list of questions? Or do we need to provide actions for people to take? So I guess we need to decide what the goal of this document is. All right. Steven.
So if I think it's okay to be questions if it's a decision guide, but then there should be some guidance on waiting, right?
Yes, I agree.
I mean, because like, is 4 questions yes and something no okay? Right? Like, like what's the what's the impact of each of those questions? Yeah,
I agree, sir. Vicky.
Yeah, I think because this is a decision guide, as Stephen named it, which is, I think, a really good place. I think that does make it easier to consume as somebody who is consuming open source. But we do need guidance on, it's not just the questions. The questions are just giving you kind of the roadmap. It's what are the answers that really matter. And so having the questions is great, but once I have the answers, how does that help me decide? And we don't have that part here yet. And so I think that would almost be the 2 parts for this document. It's like, okay, here are the things you have to answer. And now here's what it looks like. Let's turn this, frankly, let's just turn this into one of those Cosmo quizzes, right? You answer all the questions and then you get scored, right? Honest God, I think that's the sort of thing that's just going to make it so much easier to use. And, obviously it's like, here's our suggestion, but you do you, honey, right? If you still want to use this, that's fine. But here's our suggested score as far as vulnerability or risk assessment type thing. Right.
Dave.
Hey, this is directly related to I think what Stephen and Vicky both said. Should we have a baseline of what the expectations should be? So, are there instructions on how to report vulnerabilities? You should expect a project provides you with blah in order to do that.
And then I'll also add in the chat, Glenn suggested, is there any way to automate this? And that may, once we decide, if we decide on a scale of good to bad, that automation might be able to help generate that kind of in a scorecard or all-star style. Or even potentially, maybe this is something we pass over to those projects to see for inclusion. Can we potentially add this to those projects? Glenn.
Yeah, indeed. And for example, if you look at the output file, the example, there are actually already sort of criteria in it, right? So the score, value, confidence based on what, the scoring, even in the end, based on the things it didn't see, it also gives like suggestions. Hey, maybe here, like enable LGTM checks or code control. This is how you do it. This is very useful actually in this way. I mean, you can easily then also embed it in your pipeline, right? In your GitHub action or whatever you have running.
That's anytime we can automate something and take the hands out of a slow human and put it in the hands of a fast computer to decide, I think is useful, especially as developers automate more and more and more. All right, team, we're coming to the top of the hour. Does anyone have any, and Judy agrees, automating would be great. Do we have any final suggestions before we close our call today? We have some, I would ask everyone for homework. Think about this document, how we can improve it, how we might be able to automate where possible, and provide suggestions on how we might shape this going forward. But any closing comments from anybody?
I'd say that this is exactly my speech at Open Source Summit Europe in September.
Well, I'm glad we can help you with your slides. All right,
And
folks. Oh, yes,
just
please.
Look at the program. That's exactly this subject.
Nice. That's excellent. So David wasn't too far off the mark. All right, well, thank you everyone for participating today. Great conversation. I'm looking forward to how we can mold this into something a little more useful. It's very early days for it. And thank you for your thoughts on the first cheat sheet / one pager. And we will talk to everyone in 2 weeks, if not sooner. Thank you all and have a great day.
See everybody.